What did your child do that you weren't allowed to be proud of? My son Max got suspended from school last week, and while I had to act disappointed and ground him, I'm actually kind of proud of what he did. Let me explain. I've been struggling lately with bills. Our rent went up again, and between that and inflation, it's been rough. Max is a smart kid, and I know he notices when I skip meals or when I'm counting pennies at the grocery store. He's always trying to help, but I keep telling him to focus on school and let me handle the adult stuff. I guess I should provide some background about why this hits so hard for me. Last winter was particularly tough. Max had outgrown all his winter clothes, and I couldn't afford new ones. He kept wearing his old jacket that was way too small, telling me it was still fine, even though I could see his wrists sticking out of the sleeves. One day, I found out he'd been staying inside during recess because he was embarrassed about his coat, and other kids had been making comments. That same month, his class was going on a field trip to the Science Museum. It was $30, which we just didn't have. Max told me he didn't want to go anyway, that museums were boring. But I later found out from his friend's mom that he'd been so excited about it weeks before, telling everyone about the robotics exhibit he wanted to see. He only started saying it was boring after I'd stared at that permission slip for too long, trying to figure out how to make it work with our budget. The worst was probably his birthday in January. He'd been begging for these specific sneakers for months. Nothing fancy, just regular Nikes that all the other kids were wearing. His old ones had holes, and he'd been duct taping them together. I promised him I'd save up, but then our heating bill doubled, and that money had to go there instead. He pretended not to be disappointed, but I heard him crying in his room that night. The next day, he came to me with his piggy bank and tried to give me his savings to help with the bills. That broke my heart. Last Thursday, I got called into the principal's office. I had to leave work early, which meant losing those hours' pay, and I was already stressed about what Max could have done. When I got there, I found Max sitting outside the office with this weirdly calm look on his face. Inside, I met with Principal Randy and Vice Principal Elise. They started explaining how they discovered Max was running what they called an unauthorized business venture on school grounds. Apparently, my little entrepreneur had noticed that the school vending machines were always empty by lunch. Budget cuts meant they weren't being restocked regularly, and the cafeteria food was, in his words, basically inedible. So what did my son do? He went to Costco with his birthday money from his grandma, $200, bought bulk snacks and drinks, and started his own mobile convenience store out of his backpack. He was charging reasonable prices too, just enough to make a small profit while still being cheaper than the vending machines. Here's where it gets interesting. He didn't just sell randomly. He had a whole system worked out. He kept a notebook with inventory tracking, profit margins, and even customer preferences. He had regular customers who could pre-order their favorites. He even gave discounts to kids he knew were struggling financially. Apparently, he could tell by who was getting free lunch. The school found out because one teacher, Ms. Zara, caught him making a transaction in the hallway. When they searched his locker, they found his inventory, $300 worth of snacks, and his business notebook. The notebook showed he'd made about $400 in profit over 3 weeks. Principal Randy was going on about unauthorized commercial activity and disrupting school operations, but I was sitting there trying not to smile. My 15-year-old son had identified a market need, created a business plan, managed inventory, handled money responsibly, even included social responsibility with his discount system. They suspended him for a week and confiscated his inventory. Officially, I grounded him and gave him a stern talking to about following school rules. But that night, after I thought he'd gone to bed, I found an envelope on my pillow. Inside was $380 with a note that said, "For the bills, Mom. I know things are hard right now. Love, Max." I sat on my bed and cried. Not because I was disappointed, but because my son had turned into this incredibly resourceful, caring young man despite all our struggles. The next morning, I told him I couldn't accept the money and made him promise to follow school rules from now on. But Reddit, here's my confession. I kept $80 of it because we really needed it for the electric bill, and I put the rest in a savings account for him.